Oh, it is good to be back. This is today's Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Arsenal News Show on the Gooner Talk. Welcome back. Thank you so much as always for tuning in and making this a part of your morning routines. We try and do this show every single day at 8 a.m. I've not been here for the last few days, but as I say, it is good to be back into the swing of things. And of course, continuing on with our 8 a.m. shows. We're not going anywhere for a while at least. So you've got your morning routines back. Thank you so much for making this a part, as always, of those and for returning with us this morning. Good morning to you all live in the chat box. Really appreciate you being here. And those that are indeed live with us today. Glenn, Paul, Rich, good morning to you. To Knowledge, we've got Carl and Jamil. We've got Brad. We've got Trader Mike. We've got Maximius. We've got Amira and Awale, or Alaway. Babatunde. We've got Bakar Lasagna in the chat. We've got Shari. We've got Matt G and Natty Tom. We've got Brian. We've got Paul. We've got Rob. We've got Mike. We've got Scouts Gooner TV. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much to all of you for listening. Greatly appreciate you being here. And yeah, as I say, it is good to return. It is good to be back into the swing of shows again. If you're listening on catch up, of course, I hope that you've been enjoying the content. I hope you enjoyed the chat with Elliot, of course, which we did and pre-recorded for you on Friday. That show went out and yeah, I think had a pretty good response overall. And you seem to enjoy the show. So thank you for those that listened to that. And if you would be ever so kind to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on. That would also be greatly appreciated too. So yes, was away, of course, this weekend in Naples and Procida as well. It was a really nice trip, really good break, and I think certainly an encouraging one to take, and I would recommend doing so. I think it might be something that I make potentially a bit of a routine over these international breaks, like the Friday to the Monday, or at least the Friday to the Sunday over the international breaks. I think myself, you guys, it's good to sometimes just take a break from a routine to reset, recharge, and come back re-energized as well. So I look forward to hearing plenty of your comments, your questions and thoughts on all of the things that we need to talk about over the course of the next 10 minutes or so. And yeah, let's jump into today's stories because there's a lot to talk about because a lot has actually happened, surprising or not, it being an international break. Things have gone down, and we start with what is actually, ironically, probably the most recent news. We're going to kind of cover the indirect Arsenal stuff that relates to Arsenal only loosely, but is more of a broader footballing news side of things than it is directly with Arsenal. But Arsenal's next opponents in the Premier League, Nottingham Forest, have sacked coach Nuno Espirito Santo. I think we all knew this was kind of on the cards. We heard reports about former Arsenal sporting director Edu Gaspar not necessarily seeing too much in terms of eye-to-eye with Nuno. And after what was an unbelievable season last year where Nottingham Forest came very close to Champions League qualification, we've now found that even with that European qualification, a great season, brilliant achievement, that nobody is safe. It is a mental club, Nottingham Forest. It's a club I have a lot of time for and had hoped. I lived in Nottingham for 3 years. I always say that I've got affiliation with the city and the people, and I've got a lot of friends who are Nottingham Forest fans, and I never really want to see them do badly. But the behaviour of their owner has made that very difficult over the last 6 to 12 months to feel that way about Nottingham Forest. And I have to feel for Nuno. What an incredible achievement! He won't struggle to get a new club, that's for sure. He's put himself into quite the contention for some of Europe's top jobs, I think, with the work that he did at Nottingham Forest. But they will have either no new manager yet in charge by the weekend. They may yet employ the likes of Ange Postecoglou has been talked about as a potential replacement for Nuno. We'll have to wait and see. Any update on this story, of course, we will talk about as the week goes on. Jose Mourinho is out of a job. Could he return to the Premier League with Nottingham Forest in the Europa League? I think it's a job that he would be genuinely excited by. But is he yet past it? I guess we will have to wait and see. But very, very, very interesting and sad news, I think, regarding Nuno's exit from Nottingham Forest. Manchester City have reached a settlement with the Premier League regarding associated party transactions. A statement on the Premier League website read, the Premier League and Manchester City have reached a settlement in relation to the arbitration commenced by the club earlier this year concerning the Premier League's associated party transactions, the APT rules. And as a result, the parties have agreed to terminate the proceedings. This settlement brings an end to the dispute between the parties regarding the APT rules. As part of the settlement, Man City accepts the current APT rules are valid and binding, and it has agreed that neither the Premier League nor the club will be making any further comment about the matter. Now, just for clarity, this isn't the 115. So for those that were seeing this story come out and thinking this was the 115, it's not the 115, it's something separate. It's to do with the associated party transactions. Of course, this is relating to sponsorships. This relates, of course, to clubs that have kind of associated parties that may indeed want to sponsor them. And we've had in the past where clubs have got sponsorships from basically companies that are owned by the same people that own them, and it's just an inflation of sponsorships. And there's rules, of course, in place, the associated party transactions, which is what they're known as. And of course, as well, it's something the Premier League recently could have made even stricter, but sadly, you need 14 clubs out of 20 to vote to get something passed, and there were not enough clubs that indeed passed that vote. So the former APT rules, of course, remain as they were. But there's no 115. This isn't the 115. This is something separate. But it does give me pause for thought around what this might mean in the future, of course, as well, regarding the 115 and whether they will get the outcome that we all want to see. We want the truth, we want the reality. We want the fair punishment for any potential breaches, if indeed they have been breached, as the allegations suggest they or claim at least that they have. So again, we will see what happens moving forwards, and with the 115, when there is an update on that story, of course we will talk about it at length and in detail, but this is a separate story. Moving into more specific Arsenal-related transfer news, Dan Casey, of course, of Arsenal previously, a youngster at the club, he has decided not to renew his contract with Arsenal and instead will join Crystal Palace. The 18-year-old was wanted by Arsenal, but there is indeed yet to be there was yet to be a resolution in his future, but he is now said to leave, and Arsenal and Crystal Palace have agreed on a compensation for the player. There's suggestions that there is going to be a sell-on clause similar to the Amari Hutchinson situation, you might remember, where he left the club at the end of his deal. No compensation fee necessarily in the same way, but there was a sell-on clause, which Arsenal then benefited from when he left to join Ipswich Town. So maybe Arsenal will benefit from a potential move in the future or not. Again, one that we'll have to wait and see on. Moving into the international football, and Ethan Nwaneri scored and won the Man of the Match award for England's under-21s as they played against Kazakhstan. Brilliant achievement, of course, for Nwaneri, who was kind of on the outskirts, if you like. He was being used as a regular substitute during the year under-21 championships in the summer, which, of course, England won. But it's good to see him getting more minutes, more opportunities to play, and, of course, scoring and contributing as well. So massive congratulations to Ethan Nwaneri on that achievement. Into the senior international level, and a new look, Martin Odegaard. The trim has happened. The new haircut for our captain is here. And so far, Odegaard has been rated as the highest performance kind of player in the European qualifiers so far, according to Who Scored, with an average rating of 8.32. Quite the achievement. And also, he's been responding in the press to the comments, of course, previously made by Tony Adams. You might remember the claims and the comments by Tony Adams that Arsenal could not win the league with Martin Odegaard as captain. But he said, I don't care that much. Everyone is allowed to have their own opinion and say what they want. I live with that. You can't care what everyone says. There'll be a lot of positive and negative things that can affect me. It's important to just block it out. I've done it my whole career. So, of course, that was the response that I know a lot of fans maybe have been waiting for somewhat. And, I mean, the comments were crazy and ridiculous and quite sad, actually. But I think it's the right response. of course, and a very well media trained response from Martin. Arsenal, of course, had a huge contingent of players involved in their game against Andorra. Still some criticism of Thomas Tuchel and the way in which, of course, England are approaching these games with these sides, and not necessarily the free-flowing attacking football that people have wanted to see from the England team and the talent that England have. But there was, of course, frustrations, I think, around the kind of broader picture of England as well. But Eze, Declan Rice, Madueke, and Miles Lewis-Skelly have all been included in the most recent starting 11, and it shows you kind of that presence, if you like. There was a really good kind of graphic, I think, of England players, how many England players Arsenal had in the English squad compared to kind of the other top 6 teams. And Arsenal, of course, having 4. I think Liverpool maybe had 1. I think City had 1, and then Spurs and others had 0. There's something to be said also about, I think, the Liverpool starting 11 recently has had absolutely no English players in it, which, of course, for the English champions is a bit of a shame. I think, it is important, not to go Brexit about it, but, I think it is important, of course, for English clubs to have that English contingent of players, and then certainly the rules associated with non-homegrown players and homegrown players is meant to encourage that more. But Arsenal's presence in the English squad is definitely a positive. It's definitely something to be very, very proud of. And the word patriot has kind of lost a little bit of meaning of late, but certainly is a nice present to have in the England squad. But the big kind of success from the European games or the international games over the course of the last few days has been that of Mikel Merino. As Spain scored 5 against Turkey, Mikel Merino scored a hat-trick, which I'm sure all of you have seen so far and have been absolutely bowled over by the replays and the goals, of course, that Mikel Merino has been scoring. And it prompted, obviously, a lot of discussion and talk around Mikel Merino in particular. And this idea that, are Arsenal getting the best? Are they getting the most? I listened to Harry's show the other day on the Chronicles of a Gooner. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. Talking about, are we getting the most from him? I think it puts to bed kind of certainly, this idea that Merino's not a defensive player. He's not a defensive. Like, if you would describe Mikel Merino, he's not a defensive player. He's not a 6. That's never been who he is. And so the suggestion, of course, that Arsenal played with 3 defensive players in midfield at Anfield, of course, is just not true. He is more defensive than Odegaard, but or Eze, of course. But this idea, of course, that we played 3 defensive midfielders against Liverpool, of course, is not true. Mikel Merino is very much an offensive-minded player in a box-to-box form, but plays kind of quite far ahead. Of course, he's not getting the space and time that he would have had in this game. But some of the finishes, some of the goals, getting him into those positions. And you have to ask some of the questions as well around kind of Zubimendi's approach. Some fantastic 6-0, sorry. 6-0 win. But the performance overall, I think, was something of an indicator about the presence that he can have, the asset that he can be, and what he can bring to this Arsenal team. And we need to find a way of course, unlocking plenty more of that. Zubimendi had an excellent performance as well in that game. Some really encouraging passes and moments, of course, as well in the fixture too. Moving more specifically into the now and the near future. According to Simon Collins of the Evening Standard, Ben White is hoping to return for this upcoming weekend. He's been out of the squad since he suffered that injury at Manchester United, but there is hope and positivity that Ben White may indeed be ready to return to the squad for this weekend. So that is something to keep an eye on as well. And that is certainly one to stay aware of and across. And hopefully we'll get some updates from Mikel Arteta in his press conference, of course, which I'll be at on Friday when that takes place. But the main story of the day, the headline act, if you will, is kind of one that is still yet to get clarity. And over the course of the weekend, this kind of popped up my phone. I remember sitting, I think I was eating pasta somewhere in Naples, and the missus had gone off to either pay the bill or whatever, and I wasn't on my phone when she was in my presence, is the point I'm trying to make. And I got this little notification that I was scrolling through, and it was I think it was Harry's show again, and Harry was doing this show on how Saliba was going to be missing for the next 2 to 3 weeks, which I really kind of switched off as much as possible over this trip and really tried not to get engaged with as much as possible. So I missed quite a lot of it I've caught up on in the last 12 hours as I was traveling home yesterday and this morning as well. And it surprised me because, I'd not really heard or seen anything. I hadn't any messages about anything. And this story from L'Equipe, which suggests that Saliba will be missing for the next 2 to 3 weeks, how much that incorporates this week specifically, and this kind of international break remains to be seen. But he suffered that ankle injury in the pre-match warm-up against Liverpool, and then of course still started the game, which was without a doubt a massive mistake, and certainly I think he's worthy of scrutiny towards the decision makers who allowed that to go through. If he was injured in the warm-up, he shouldn't have started. The positive for Arsenal, of course, is that Christian Mosquera was excellent in that game, and I think that against Nottingham Forest, maybe even against Manchester City, we've got a lot of faith and hope that Mosquera will continue to really impress. We've got a very good young defender here who's clearly capable. He showed that at Anfield. But William Saliba, if indeed the report is accurate, and I must suggest, of course, we've not yet heard really anything on this side of the channel to suggest anything else around this as well. But I can see Arsenal come in the chat saying that Charles Watts is already saying the 2 to 3 week suggestion is not yet to be trusted. So, as I said, I've not heard anything. Nothing on this side of the channel has been suggested as of yet, and we're kind of still awaiting clarification. And of course, we'll hear from Mikel Arteta on Friday about the latest on the squad. So yeah, that's kind of it's a bit of a down end, if you like, to the news. There was a lot of stories, but I think that overall Arsenal can be very pleased about what's been going on over the break so far. Touch wood, we've had no issues, no injury situations. Odegaard's been performing very, very well. Calafiori, Gyökeres, of course, I think has drawn a little bit of attention over the break as well for some of his performances. I think there's been some discourse around Gyökeres. I'm not really paying too much attention to it, to be honest. I mean, it's an international break and he's not playing for Arsenal. He's still adapting, of course, to Arsenal as well. I think that there's a lot of people that want to kind of tear Gyökeres down as quickly as possible, particularly rival fans and pundits want to kind of tear Gyökeres down. I get it. It comes from a place of fear. It doesn't come from anywhere else. It comes from a place of just pure fear that they don't really want Gyökeres to hit the ground running. They want to put the pressure on him as quickly and as hastily as possible. And it shows a weakness, I think, in their mindsets around the player. They can't let him just crack on. They just have to focus in and around the player that is, of course, now an Arsenal player. Eze, too. Some scrutiny of his performance for England against Andorra. Probably the type of scrutiny that he's not yet experienced with the Crystal Palace, because the reality is, of course, that when you come and play for Arsenal, that changes things. That just does. It just changes things. It changes how you're perceived. It changes how people talk about you. It changes a lot just playing for Arsenal, pulling on that red and white shirt, adorning yourself with that badge. It changes everything about what and who you are and how you're viewed and what goes on. And that's never going to change. It's worth pointing out. It's never, ever, ever going to change. So the players need to deal with that. We need to deal with that as fans. We need to back our players, back the team, support the players, and challenge, of course, of those points of view when indeed they do emerge. But it is a frustration, but it is a reality for Arsenal as well, and all of the players and us as supporters too. But it's not going to change. What could change, though, is your geolocation. Your geolocation could change, but only if you have access to a specific tool. And changing your geolocation digitally is a really important asset to have. Now, I changed my physical geolocation just a few days ago. In fact, I changed it just a few hours ago when I changed my geolocation from Italy to the UK. But while I was in Italy, I was able to hop back to the UK digitally like that, with the benefit, of course, with the one, the only NordVPN, which gave me that superpower, if you will, to hop over back to the UK and to watch things, of course, that I wouldn't typically be able to watch being outside of my home nation. And some things are location blocked. Some things, of course, some TV shows, Netflix episodes, football, of course, can indeed not be accessible. Sometimes I'm scrolling through X and I want to watch a video of Mikel Merino's goal and it says, I can't view this because I can't view it in my location. Well, just chuck on NordVPN hop back to wherever it is I need to watch that. And of course, I can watch the video again and I can see Mikel Merino smashing in a hat-trick against Turkey. So that is a must. Not only that, but of course, while I was away, there was a number of times we were kind of out and about and I needed to get Wi-Fi service because the signal wasn't great. And if I hopped onto like a public Wi-Fi domain, there's always a little bit of a risk that you might indeed be surrendering your data to anybody else on that public Wi-Fi network because it doesn't have the protections of your private Wi-Fi network that you have in your home. And a VPN is the absolute way to solve that issue and to keep yourself protected while you're online. So if you go to nordvpn.com/Gooner, you can get yourself a significant discount off a 1 or a 2-year plan. And if you go for that 2-year deal, you can get 4 months extra thrown in free. And if you're not happy with the service for whatever reason, you get a 30-day money-back guarantee as well. Terms and conditions available on the NordVPN website. Well, let's go to part 2, your questions and more, as we welcome you back to the fold right after this. Right, this is part 2 of today's show where we're going to be jumping into the chat box and tackling some of your thoughts, some of your feelings. And so I'm looking forward, of course, to reintegrating all of us into our question and answer episodes. We're going to be doing some more phone-ins, I think, as well. Not today, but of course, across the season as well. So if you want to be involved with these phone-ins, of course, you need to be watching live to get notified of when, of course, we're doing that. We always do our shows at 8 a.m. every single day. Perhaps you're watching this show for the very first time. We did find, of course, when I went away to Canada earlier in the year and took a 2-week break from the channel and came back, that a lot of people had started watching for the first time. So maybe this is your first time watching. Well, we do this show every single day at this time, live with the chat box. And of course, you can always catch up if you're unable to watch it. And you can listen on our audio platforms on Spotify, or of course on iTunes or any other platforms where you get your podcasts. So yes, and we host plenty of fantastic guests on the show as well. As you listen back to the show with Elliot that we did on Friday, talking about kind of Mikel Arteta, talking about kind of the swell of noise around Arteta so early on in the season, and of course our approach to plenty of games as well. Right, let's go to the chat and tackle some of these cues, shall we? Let's go. Let's go to Chris, who says, VPN stuff we'll talk about later. Nick says, is Shane turning up for a debate? I hope so. I was chatting to Shane yesterday. Offered, of course, Shane the chance to come on. I wasn't aware of Shane's work prior to yesterday, but I noticed he'd been tweeting a few things about me, so I offered him the chance, and I think we're hopefully going to make it happen. So hopefully that'll go down well. Matt says, Tom, did you read Bayern Munich's owner's comments about Nicholas Jackson? Why would he say yes? Was it Hoeneß? And his comments about the idea that Nicholas Jackson won't play 40 games to trigger the obligation to play. You have strange comments. Kind of arrogant comments and completely inappropriate, I thought, as well. So, yeah, just in my honest opinion. But yeah, it's very strange comments, Matt, just to say about a player you've just signed. Nick says, how have I managed to click the same questions 3 times in a row? Mark says, which signings were Arteta's or Berta's? What players would Berta target with more control, and what if he worked with Wenger? Mark, thank you so much for your kind donation. The answer to your question is that there aren't any signings that are Arteta signings or Berta signings. The only way Arsenal sign any player is if everybody is fully aligned and makes the decision together. There isn't a player that, say, Berta wants, Arteta doesn't want, and we sign them, or vice versa. That hasn't happened at no point. There could be players where an individual has had kind of a greater influence on the decision-making behind the target. It might be that they had a number of different options and suggestions of different targets, but in the end, when Arsenal move for a player, it comes through alignments across the club. It doesn't come from, one person getting their way over somebody else. So they pull their resources, they pull their know-how, they pull their knowledge together, and that's how decisions get made on who Arsenal sign. James says, how many points are you expecting from our next 3 fixtures? Can we do a poll as well? I don't know if we'll do a poll on that question, but I think Arsenal have got to try and target 9 from 9. Win 2 matches at home against Forest and City. I think both of those teams have had vulnerabilities so far this season. Of course, go away to Newcastle, who as well have had their problems. So we have to try to maximise the points. If we can get 15 from the first 18 available points, I think Arsenal would have to be very happy with that indeed. Arthur said, well, people referenced Arteta on one occasion, forcing Thomas Partey back onto the pitch when he was injured. He also did it against Odegaard as well. I don't think the relationship between Arteta and injuries is what people make it out to be. The conspiracy theories around this are absolutely mad. I mean, to be fair, Thomas Partey's injury against Spurs, when we saw Arteta kind of say go back, was absolutely ridiculous behaviour from Partey. To walk off the pitch during an open phase of play was one of the most bizarre decisions I've ever seen a player make. So I kind of empathise with the position of the manager who's watching his player walk off while the opposition try and counter, rather than even just being an obstacle on the field. Very strange behaviour. Arsenal coaches, do you think us playing with a double six pivot, Rice and Zubi, is allowing us to play double tens, and Eze and Odegaard will solve our creative problems? I mean, solve is obviously a big word, but will it help? Yes, I think so. I think there are games where I'd like to see Eze and Odegaard play as double tens, and other games where I think Rice and Zubimendi is the right formation and structure for our midfield. I think we need to be fluid and changeable and, malleable. I think these are the words that I think we would use to describe how the lineup needs to be. But yes, absolutely. Brad says, did you see Olivia Smith score an absolute stunner? Yes, I did. And I'm asking myself now why on earth that wasn't in my slideshow, because I had a whole slide on it. So, the women's team, of course, opened the WSL season with an absolutely fantastic victory that we saw the weekend. I mean, look here. I've just for some reason it wasn't there, but yes, a perfect start to the WSL season. Very right of you, Brad, to bring that up. He's been a member now, by the way, for 30 months with us. What a great goal! You become the most expensive player in WSL women's football history, and you start off the campaign with a goal like that to open the scoring as well, especially after you'd already gone a goal down, in the game as well. Goals from Chloe Kelly, Stinda Blackstenius, and Frida Marlem as well. Frida Marlem, really positioning herself to have an unbelievable campaign potentially. And of course, the club also said goodbye to Leah Volti after 7 years of service. Brilliant servant to the club, and we wish her all the best. I believe she's going to Juve. So a sad goodbye, but one, of course, that ended in her final game winning a European Cup. So you can't really end on anything better, really, I suppose. And again, a great result to start the WSL season. Tamba says, hi, Tom. What do you think of Mikel shifting to a 4-4-2 formation to incorporate Merino and unlock the potential as a makeshift centre forward to get the best out of him? Of course, well, he wasn't, necessarily playing, in kind of this centre forward role when he was getting kind of these moments, of course, for Spain. And he's kind of given a lot more freedom, if you like, to play that role and to play into those attacking areas. Oyarzábal, plays with Yamal and Nico Williams, and then Merino's tasked with kind of moving into those attacking spaces as well. So I don't think it's necessarily as simple as saying, and I also don't think, Arteta never really talks about formations on paper like 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 or 4-2-1-3, whatever. He doesn't really talk about things in that way, and Arsenal don't really look at things in that way either. So I think when it comes to how Arteta uses Merino, I think that he's not necessarily in our best 11, but I do think that he is a player that will add a lot of value to us this season. I talked about that of Elliot, actually. I think I spoke about it on the Vision, or I don't know if I spoke about it on Friday, but I did say that I thought Mikel Merino is due to have kind of a season this year where he really is held up as an asset to this team and can be kind of given the freedom to make differences for Arsenal, particularly late on, I think, in games. Kingley says, Tom, do you think there's a correlation between the app situation of the 115? I suspect the City might get a lesser punishment. It's impossible to know the APT situation in the 115. It's impossible to know. There's no way of knowing what's going to happen at the moment. But of course, I empathise with those that see that result, and at the end of the day, it's very difficult to not get those feelings of trepidation and apprehension about what it could mean. So I get you, but it's impossible to kind of make any grounded, objective, factual opinions really around what's going to happen, because we just don't know. Sam says, Tom, I remember the first show of yours I caught following the Chelsea 5-0 win. I was up early from work and was in so much awe I needed to listen to something, and there you were. Thank you, Samuel, for listening. And what a game, of course, to tune in for. Kai Havertz's brace, of course, against his former side. Brilliant moment. A brilliant moment to see that happen, and hopefully more results like that this season. Claire says, Tom, you should be saying European champions Arsenal when discussing the ladies. Indeed, I should. You're absolutely right to point that out, Claire. Michael says, slow start. Give Victor a few weeks. We've got to give Victor, of course, time to settle in and to adapt to Arsenal, and sincerely hope that he's going to do that quickly. But it could take some time, and that's time that we're going to have to allow him. And Arsenal coach, as Eze said, he ignores the noise, the media, and the online stuff. Gyökeres, with his hair flick celebration, shows you that he doesn't ignore it. Who do you think is the right approach? I don't think there's necessarily kind of a blanket rule. I think it's a case-by-case basis. I think some players thrive off that. I think some players, absolutely absorb it all and use it as fuel for themselves. But then I think other players don't necessarily want to take that approach and want to entirely just shut it all out and to stop it from taking hold of kind of their approach to how they play the game. So it depends. It depends on the player. I think it depends on the person. It depends on the man or woman that's, of course, facing that ridiculous nature of society that we have to deal with. In 2025, it is a joke that you have these horrible people out there that just say terrible things, and the awful level of punditry and the quality of punditry that's just diminished so significantly over the last 10 years in particular, that players also now have to deal with. So yeah, I think that it's on a case-by-case basis. I don't think there is a right or wrong approach. I think it depends on how the person uses or doesn't use or doesn't even acknowledge, the criticism and punditry and abuse that is out there. It may be that Gyökeres is the type that uses that as encouragement. He did that celebration after scoring 2 goals, in 2 games. So I think that shows you maybe the way in which he uses it. It's when it becomes kind of more detrimental to the players in which it then becomes something of a problem. Mark says, would it be a successful season if we won the League Cup and the FA Cup against big teams like Liverpool and City, but finished second in the league? Well, would it be a successful season if we won 2 trophies and finished second by a couple of points? It's mad to me, Mark, this is even a question, to be honest. Lifting 2 trophies. It's quite a cool case study, this. And I'd love to know kind of where the question comes from, Mark, and kind of where you see the answer to that question, because this idea that you could argue it wouldn't be a successful season if Arsenal got to a Champions League final, finished second by a couple of points behind the leaders, but lifted 2 domestic cups. I mean, who on earth could argue that isn't a successful season? I think that's mad. Absolutely mad if you won 2 cups but didn't win either of the 2 other competitions. You can only win 4 trophies maximum, which no one has ever done. No one has ever won all 4 in the same season. And if Arsenal win 2 of those 4, but get again closer to the title and take another step forward in the Champions League to the final, that's not success. I'd really have to question the just where and how you'd even justify that. I really would have to question. Arthur says Harry was asked the same question. He said no. Really? Harry, what? 2 cups in 1 season. You take a step forward to the Champions League final. You go even a step closer to winning the Premier League. And that's not a success? I can't. I'm obviously taking your word for it. I don't know what context Harry's applied to this, so it's impossible for me to really go in on him. And he's my mate, so I would happily. But yeah, I don't know how you'd ever justify that. I don't know how you'd ever justify that not being a success. 2 cups of 4. You can only win 4. And there's a lot of really, really, really good teams in these competitions. And to suggest that we'd win 2 of them in the same season, and it wouldn't be a success. That's crazy. Soup says technically it is successful, but the real question is, are they trophies that we want? If I'm honest, what has happened to people? What What is going on? Seriously, like in 99.4%, I think was the stat Elliot used on Friday, of clubs in the world aren't in contention for silverware. They don't enter the seasons for the top 4 honours in their respective nation. They aren't considered to be viable clubs to win those. And if any of them do, it is seen as a huge shock. And you can't pick and choose in this sport because it's sport. I'd love to win the Premier League. I'd love to win the Champions League. They're trophies I absolutely want. But to suggest that picking up 2 trophies this season, being the League Cup and the FA Cup, while also finishing 2 points beyond the champion, showing the progress that we've made, got so much closer to them from, of course, the disappointment from last season, and get to a Champions League final, which Arsenal haven't done, in which will be 20 years. That would show you kind of the position that Arsenal are in as a club, double winners, a domestic double, and then still say that, are they trophies we want? Look, the League Cup has always had something of an edge to the kind of on its own. I think if you win it with something else, it raises that accolade quite considerably. On its own, it kind of lacks, of course. And I think there's a fair debate to be had about the League Cup in isolation as a competition, because there's a lot of issues I've got with the League Cup, the prize you get for winning it, the lack of Europa League or Champions League qualification. Of course, you get Conference League qualification, the double-legged semi-finals, all of that. I get that. In isolation, the League Cup, there are contexts to that, which I'm never a fan of. And if you have the chance to win the league and your chances of winning the league increase by not being in the League Cup, I think there's really good debates to be had around whether it's worth it or not. But if you win it alongside another trophy and you've lifted 2 in the same season, and one of them is the League Cup, that raises, for me, the value, the stature of the competition. To say you've won 2 of the 4, you've won 50% of all of the trophies you could have won in a single season, where 99+% of clubs don't win any, and we're picking and choosing. Like, I don't, great, we won 2 cups. Yeah, I want that one. It boggles the mind. It absolutely boggles the mind for me. I can't ever. That's a poll. That's a poll. That if you want a poll, let's throw that into the chat. And I know you have to always, allow the tiny percentage for the trolling, but is a successful season for Arsenal this, which is FA Cup win, League Cup. Oh, I can't type this morning. It's been a while. League Cup win, EPL second by 1/2 points, and UCL final L. So losing the final. Is that a successful season? There's your poll. They're the types of polls we like. They're your controversial ones. Harry. I can't get over it. I can't believe it. Harry, if you're watching, text me right now. Get on this show and explain yourself, because that's crazy. If it's true, maybe they've undersold what you've said. Maybe they've not contextualized it. My goodness gracious. Mark says, FYI, I would consider it to be successful, but would come in second and losing the Champions League cause Arteta to doubt himself. I don't think so. I think if anything, it would reaffirm his feeling, because he'd look at it and go, well, last season we finished how many points off? The season before that, we were 2 points off. If we go within 1 point and we take a step forward in the Champions League, that's progress. You've won 2 trophies. That's progress. Significant progress. We're not talking about Man United winning the League Cup or the FA Cup and finishing 8th or 12th or whatever. We're talking about Arsenal winning the FA Cup and the League Cup and getting to the Champions League final and coming exceptionally close to a Premier League title. Having already, of course, the start of this season, dealing with already an injury crisis. So, yeah, look, I just, I'm speechless. Really, genuinely. Ian says, how do you measure whether being in a League Cup or not being in the league increases chance of winning the Premier League? Where is the successful statistics and probabilities on that model on the statement? I don't know. There wasn't a statement. It was a question. It was if being out of the League Cup helps potentially winning, then for sure. But there's a good argument, of course, the number of times that City won the League Cup and then won the Premier League, that you could argue that winning the League Cup helps you, can improve your chances. So it was a question more than a statement. And that's why the word if was at the beginning of it. Sammy says that's the quickest vote I've ever cast. Brad says that question asked a yes, but winning a domestic cup and finishing 8th would be different. Yeah, of course. And I think we just kind of touched on that, didn't we, Brad? We said, Man United winning the FA Cup, winning the League Cup, and then they finished, well down the table. Spurs finishing 17th and winning the Europa League is not a successful season. I mean, maybe for Spurs, in context, you can make an argument, but for Arsenal finishing 17th, I mean, that's a sackable offence, and I'm glad that they did sack Ange Postecoglou from a football point of view, not from an Arsenal fan point of view, but they absolutely should have sacked Ange Postecoglou. He finished 17th. He lost 22 games. I think it was 22. 22 Premier League matches. That's not just half of the number of games that you've played in the league. And by the way, Arsenal, of course, also had an injury crisis that was worse than Tottenham's. They lost 22 games last season. You could argue that they had to lift the trophy, that Europa League. And Matt's arguing, for Spurs, that is a successful season. But they ain't winning anything else. And the Europa League, of course, is a bit of a joke competition, unfortunately, now, because the way they've changed the structure, it's lost that prestige it did have when you had the Champions League sides dropping down into it. Now it is teams that finished 15th and 17th in the Prem are the two teams in the final. That's a real slight on the competition. It's a real stain on the Europa League that happened. So, yeah. Jason says, Ange had an injury crisis, though. Hold on a second. What? Well, they had less than Arsenal, but energy's a bit different. That's very interesting, Jason. Very interesting. Joe says they lost 22 games, but are still high up on the European Cup that they won. But honestly, that cup could have been won by Tranmere. In the old system, they never would have won it. Yeah, absolutely. Shepard says, just want Arteta to win the Champions League so the haters won't have a choice but to put him as the greatest Emirates era manager. Yeah, if Arsenal were to win the Champions League under Arteta, oh my goodness, we came pretty darn close last season to doing that. And it shows you the competitivity that we've got in that competition. But yeah, goodness gracious me. It would be, if Arsenal won the Champions League, just even thinking about it, hairs are standing on end. just with the irony of it all. Chris says, hi Tom, Opta ranks the English Championship as a stronger league than some of the other European leagues, like the Dutch Eredivisie. Should the Championship winner get a ticket to the Champions League? No, Chris, is the answer to that question. But I get your point about the competitivity of the Championship. It's a very fair point. What? Sykes from Delane. I think I'm saying that right. Sykes from Delane says we need to actually win with these players. Arteta is buying winners to bring a winning mentality. Yeah, I would agree with you. Gary says any season you win silverware, regardless of the competition, is success. If you don't think that, then you will never be satisfied in any season unless you do what City have done in 3 times. Again, in context, if Arsenal won the Europa League and finished 17th and lost 22 games, that's still a failure, especially in the iteration of the current Europa League. In my opinion, that's a failure. If we won the Europa League but finished 17th and lost 22 games, I'd want the manager sacked. I would want the manager nowhere near us next season. I'd be, thanks so much for getting us back into the Champions League. Appreciate that. And what you did in that competition, frankly, you probably should have done with the wealth of resources that's available to you and the opposition you're coming up against. But 17th with 22 defeats when you've had less injuries than Arsenal, who have finished second and got to 2 cup semi-finals, including the Champions League. I'm sorry, that's inexcusable. So, no. Even for Spurs, I cannot accept that is a successful season. I get that there's a desperation there to have won a trophy. I absolutely understand that. I absolutely get that. But I cannot tell you how much of a bigger achievement it was for Crystal Palace to win the FA Cup and finish 12th than it was for Tottenham to finish 17th with 22 defeats and win the Europa League. Crystal Palace won a far tougher competition to win in the FA Cup than Spurs did by winning the Europa. They beat Man United in the final. Man United. That's who they beat to win that competition. Crystal Palace went and beat Manchester City in the final of the competition, getting all the way to the final itself. Far tougher for Crystal Palace, with far less resources, with not as good of a squad. It was a far better achievement, far, far bigger achievement than what Spurs did. Far, far bigger. So I barely even register the Spurs Europa League. But not, I know it comes across like, oh, look at this bitter Arsenal fan. I get that. But in all honesty, no matter who I was a fan of, if any club had finished 17th, if we had finished 17th and won the Europa League, I'd want the manager gone tomorrow. Tomorrow. It's not justifiable. It's just not. The fact that anybody, anywhere, would ever think about trying to justify Ange Postecoglou's continuation at Tottenham after finishing 17th with 22 league defeats is beyond a joke. Like, beyond a joke. Right, let's check in on the poll, shall we? I'm genuinely shocked that there's actually such a large contingent of you that have said no to this. So the question was, is a successful season for Arsenal winning the FA Cup, winning the League Cup, finishing second by a couple of points in the Premier League and getting to the Champions League final? Currently, over 200 of you have voted on this. 84% of you have said yes. 16% of you have said no. 16. That means 32 people of that 200. 32. Do you remember what I said? There's 60% of people are good, 20% of people lose their way, 20% of people can't be helped. So I guess we always have to kind of account for 20%, I guess. But I like to think that we don't have many of the 20% in our community. But there you go. Mike says people have gone la about which trophy suggests success, and to be honest, Harry has played into the narrative a little. I think it's nuts. Shornito says the fact that the 16th and 17th teams in the Premier, I think United finished 15th in the end, didn't they? Got to the final, speak volumes of how horrible the Europa League was last season. Arsenal Code says those are the European champions, mate. Let's not slander them. Gary says, Tom, behave. Of course, there's always context when you put it like that, but I am being realistic here and not talking about the nonsense of being 17th in the league. I'm 52 and I've never seen us finish that line. Yeah, what a privilege it is, Gary. Mike says people have gone. Oh, yeah, we've kind of done that one. Joe says adding on 3 years to the current. Yeah, I can see that definitely happening. As in Arteta's contract. I think, if Arsenal have, I think they'll renew his contract. I think they'll renew his contract. That's kind of just a blanket statement. I think whatever kind of happens realistically, I think that he'll probably have his contract renewed. It's just about whether or not we feel it's been earned. Now, I personally have gone kind of on the record and saying that I think to earn the next contract, he probably has to lift the Premier League or the Champions League, ironically. However, if he was to win a domestic double in FA Cup and League Cup in the same season, I think that would probably sway my opinion. I'd probably change my mind if Arsenal did that in a single season, won 2 of the 4 trophies. I think that would, and especially if we finished if we got to the Champions League final and finished second in the league again, I think that would probably change my mind if that happened. But that's not happened yet. We don't know what's going to happen yet. We've got to wait and see what's going to happen. But I don't want to see Arsenal going out against Port Vale in the League Cup, that's for sure. We can't take these games for granted. We've already seen Man United beaten by Grimsby. And we have a very deep squad now, a very strong squad now. We should be using as much of this squad as we can. I know that we've lost a fair few players to injuries already this season, which is gutting. But, it's a very good squad and we've spent a lot of money on it. So I don't want to see the kids starting, other than the likes of, Dowman, Nwaneri, Lewis Skelly. But we should be starting Trossard. We should be starting Merino. We should be starting Norgard. We should be starting Mosquera and Hincapié. I don't think this is being talked about enough. I might write a piece on this today. I'm really excited about Hincapié. I don't know if it's just me. I kind of think he's been forgotten a little bit. I feel like he's been a little bit forgotten, has Hincapié. He's a great signing. It's a great, great signing, Hincapié. And I really, really genuinely am excited to see what he brings to this team. I think he's been forgotten somewhat in the aura. I mean, he played. Did he play? Yes, he played at left centre half for Ecuador in their game against Paraguay. Kept a clean sheet in the fixture, 0-0 result between the two teams. Yeah, look, I'm really excited about this signing. I don't think it's being talked about enough. Joe says, Tom, we're talking about Saliba. Saliba's contract, not Arteta's contract. So, I've said this before. I did a report last week. Arsenal were very calm on this. If it was me, and again, I'm not going off knowledge or information. Well, a little bit, but just based on where I'm at on this, I'm pretty chill about Saliba. I'd feel pretty comfortable at the moment about his future with Arsenal. So, I'm happy about that. I think I think he'll probably end up renewing, but again, we can't take anything for granted, and we don't know yet. But his comments in the summer, of course, to the AFTV boys were pretty good. But again, it could just be a spur of the moment comment rather than anything else. But they are, as I've said before, Arsenal very calm. Those situations are progressing, and with Konate going to Real Madrid potentially, it looks like I think that also helps the situation as well. Arthur says, Tom, 50 minutes in and no one's mentioned Martinelli. I think that's a bit refreshing, Arthur, to be honest. I think the less said about that, the better at the moment. Not because I don't want to address it. I just think for his sake, it's probably best that, the conversation is not around him. I think he's just given some space. I think he needs some space at the moment. The window's closed. He's not going anywhere. I guess that was the other thing we haven't really talked about. Trossard linked with a move to Turkey. I don't think that will happen. Be very surprised if that would happen. I was on with Charles and Simon on his Patreon show the other day, and we kind of talked about both Charles and Simon agreed that if we got offered £20 million, they would probably take that, even if we can't replace him. I'm still pretty torn on that idea. I'm still torn on that. So yeah, and all of the other news. Yeah, Joe, you're right to point this out. Daniel Levy leaving the European champion. I weirdly think that he did more than people give him credit for there. I don't think much will change with him leaving, but I could be wrong. Well, I don't think much will change with him going. But let's wait and see. They've got a good manager now. That's the bigger change. I think more than anything, they need to bring in a good manager, and Thomas Frank is a good manager. So, but they're still Spurs. They can still go to City and win, and then lose at home to Bournemouth, getting absolutely battered. So, yeah, look, I just think it's very difficult to talk about Tottenham in any kind of grounded, serious way because they're just so volatile, so incredibly volatile. And do I think that Levy was going to sell the club? It's not his club to sell. It's Joe Lewis's club to sell. So it's not really up to him. Mark says, Tom, would you sell Nwaneri and Mars Lewis Skelly for Barcola and Doué? Wow. Goodness me. So how I'm viewing this is we have Saka, Dalman, Eze, Martinelli, Trossard, Gyökeres, Havertz, Merino, Odegaard, Nwaneri. It's 10 players. All of them are offensive-minded players. You add Barcola, who I love, and that's why I'm pausing on this question. And I love Desiree Doué as well. I think they're both brilliant players. I'm pausing on this because I like the two players, but I don't. A really good question, Mark. You're asking some really good questions that are sparking a lot of debate. A lot of people say yes, a lot of people say no. And the chat says no, says Carl. I like Doué, says Benny. The answer is yes, unfortunately, says Lots. But absolutely not. Daryl says nah. Alf says no. MLS stays. Matt says, you know you would, Tom. Oh, I might. All right, I might do that. I don't think it's too controversial to say you might be tempted by that. I don't think it's too controversial at all. You bring in two players in the European champions who just won the Champions League, and you replace two players who aren't starting for Arsenal, who could potentially be third choice in their relevant positions for two of the best young players in the world. I don't think it's that controversial to say you might do it. So I think you can make a very good argument for it. But the reality is it's not going to happen. And I love both Nwaneri and Skelly and think they're going to be great successes at Arsenal. So, it's but it was a good question. Anyway, we're nearly at 9, so we're going to wrap this up. Let's have a quick check on that poll. Let's see if my mental state is going to diminish further. Oh, it is 20%. I told you, there's 20% always. It can't be helped. 80% said yes, FA Cup, League Cup, and finishing second in the Premier League and getting to this final of the Champions League would be a successful season. 20% say no. If you're listening to this on catch up, let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Please explain your answer. Don't just put yes or no. I'd love to hear your explanations as to why. But thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Really appreciate your time. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic start to your week. Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for listening. It's been nearly 1,000 of you tuning in, which for these shows during an international break is always an absolute blessing. So thank you to you all for listening. And I'll be back with you tomorrow morning, bright and early, for more chat and talk about all the latest Arsenal news. See you soon. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.